Your job as a composer for, I think, 99.9% of films, and I'm only saying that just because there may be an exception, is to create an authority to the film. So you're creating a sound that helps the audience to engage in the film and the tone of the film that they're watching, and helps them believe in it, and helps set up a logic to which that experience is going to unfold in front of them. And of course, within that, there's all sorts of things one does to play with that or mislead the audience, or but essentially you're giving them permission to feel things, which without the score they'd be left feeling a bit dry emotionally.
Brian Smith here, and welcome to the Dreampath podcast, where I try to get inside the heads of talented creatives from all over the world. My goal is to demystify and humanize the creative process and make it accessible to everyone. Now let's jump in. Anthony Willis is on the show today. Anthony is a film composer who scored the film Promising Young Woman with Carey Mulligan, Bo Burnham, Laverne Cox, and Alison Brie. Written and directed by Emerald Fennell, Promising Young Woman premiered at Sundance this year, which is where I had the good fortune to sit down with Anthony for this interview. Without giving the plot away, I can tell you that Promising Young Woman crosses between genres multiple times. Just when you think you're settling into a drama, you laugh and think it's a comedy. Just when you think you're watching a comedy, it turns dark, very dark. But when the movie makes you feel uncomfortable, it's not due to the capriciousness of the writer-director. It's because the story and the theme of the film demand that the audience feel that discomfort. In this interview, Anthony and I talk about this dynamic in the film, as well as his work in the How to Train Your Dragon movies from DreamWorks Studios, Despicable Me 2, Solo, A Star Wars Story, and Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Men Tell No Tales. We also talk about his scoring work on video games, like Fortnite. I knew very little about film scoring going into this interview, but came away with a new respect for the contributions made by film composers to the tone and feel of films and video games. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy my conversation with film composer Anthony Willis. Anthony Willis, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Brian, so much for having me.
And can you tell us what brings you to Sundance?
So I'm here to support the film Promising Young Woman, directed by Emerald Fennell, and I was lucky enough to compose the score for the movie.
How did you get involved with that project?
I've known Emerald, she's been in my life a long time because we actually, funny enough, were at high school together in England. She was a very impressive actress at the time in all the school plays. So I've been aware of Emerald as a force of nature for a long time. And she, right when she was finishing shooting the film, she was looking for a composer, which is obviously a really challenging decision, especially for a film that's as unique as this one. And really, I just wanted to give her some advice. But she very sweetly, invited me to watch the film and write a demo and sort of see if, really I was just there to be a resource to help her, have a perspective on how the music could be if I were doing it or if somebody like me were doing it. And I was so inspired by Carey Mulligan's performance and the character and the journey of the character she plays, Cassie, in the movie. And I spoke to the music supervisor as well, and we sort of tried to see if we could find a theme that would actually, bind the movie together, because it does move through quite a few genres. And that was really cool that she sort of steered me to that. And I wrote one, and Emerald loved it, and that was that.
So that's an interesting coincidence that you grew up around the filmmaker. Around the director.
Yeah, it is. Well, England is so horribly cliquey, and it's a small country, and people overlap. There's a lot of overlap, but that's also a wonderful thing about certainly the film community in general, especially in England. But and everybody out who then moves to LA gets to know each other, and everybody's there to support each other and help each other out. So yeah, I'm really lucky to be part of that and part of that friendship group.
Was there an art school that you went to in England, or just a regular high school?
I started music when I was very young. I was a chorister. I don't know if you know, in England there's a sort of long-standing chorister tradition where when you're sort of 8 years old, you're sent off to boarding school to sing in these beautiful cathedrals, or in my case, St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle. And it was the most incredible training. I was just kind of immersed in some of the world's most beautiful choral music for day on and day in, day out. And that really rubbed off on me. And then when I went to my next school, which was Marlborough, I sort of, wanted to start writing my own music. And
at what age were you when you wanted to do that?
I was 13.
Oh, wow.
And, I wrote some music for the school plays, and it was an amazing school. And I had I was a music scholar, and so I had access to these amazing facilities. And then I went on to study music at the University of Bristol, which is a really cool city. I mean, it's very vibrant, and there's a huge music scene there. A lot of dubstep came out of there. But it's also, if you look past the buildings, you can see cows in the fields. It's a very sort of rural city as well. It's a beautiful place to study. And then right after that, I went to USC, to the film scoring program. Actually, that's not quite true. I took a year to desperately save up money and moved back in with my parents and taught piano and took any job I could to save up to go to USC. And that was really valuable because it got me to LA, and it got me, into the heart of I wouldn't say the heart of the film music business, but certainly the access that program has to alumni.
Oh, yeah.
Is being, really great. So
that's sort of the heart of the industry right there.
Yes.
At USC and all the people. I've heard that it's one of the most difficult film schools to get into in any of those programs.
Yeah, no, it's tough. And I mean, the new film school that they opened a couple of years ago is the Lucas School, is absolutely insane. Well, yeah, Spielberg Lucas School, I think it is incredibly grand. It looks like a sort of Spanish film set. And we were kind of in the basement there, which is a fairly accurate model for what the life is like as a composer in the business.
Yeah. So let's go back to age 8 and the boarding school. That sounds like a pretty unique trajectory for a young child. I don't know hardly anybody who has been to boarding school at age 8, but it sounds like that's kind of a normal thing for people in your town or your area who have musical skills and might be musical prodigies.
I think it's becoming less normal. I mean, I think it's quite a thing to go leave your parents age 8, and certainly it was overwhelming, but it was also this incredible adventure. I mean, the school was situated in the foothills of Windsor Castle, and when you were senior enough as a chorister, you'd have a key, to go up and
in a castle.
Yeah, Windsor Castle, which is
it's almost like Hogwarts.
It's definitely one of the most interesting castles in England. I mean, it was Henry VIII is buried there. I'd walk over his grave every day.
Oh my goodness!
It was it was a phenomenal. It was an amazing adventure. I mean, we'd like play hide and seek on the banks of the castle, which are these steep. We weren't supposed to, but we did. And there was a huge amount of history, and it was really, really cool. Yeah, very unique place to go to school for sure.
Now, looking back, putting yourself in your 8-year-old shoes, at the time, did you know how special and unique that was to get a boarding school immersion experience like that at such a young age?
I think I did. I mean, I think you pull up, you can take the train to Windsor from London. It takes about 20 minutes. And as you roll in, you see this huge castle ahead of you. And in fact, the castle is very much situated, it sort of has its butt sticking right into the town, and the town sort of wraps around it. And then it then goes on to expand out into these beautiful parklands, where in fact our playing fields were, where we play football and cricket. God, that sounds so pompous. But yeah, I mean, I think it was pretty obvious to me that it was a pretty special place. And, I mean, it's funny with everything that's going on right now with the royal family and all of that press, but, we were singing quite regularly at those events for them. So you had this sense of, there was a huge sense of ceremony to everything. I think, the big reaction I had having left was that my time was so intense, and, the fear of waking up with a sore throat and not being able to sing, or it was quite, I think it certainly prepared me for the pressure of Hollywood, I think. But the reaction I sort of had after that was suddenly then going on to a school where I had a lot of time to myself. And that was when I was like, wow, I actually can have time to write some music.
And that was University of Bristol, or was that earlier?
Or even, at Marlborough, So, whereas I think you probably had about 20 minutes to yourself in the day, get up, practice instrument 1, go and sing for an hour, go to lessons, go to sport, practice instrument 2, go and prepare for the service. That it was very intense routine for an 8-year-old for sure.
Yeah. And what was your goal in high school, college, and then in film scoring school at USC? in terms of the types of instruments that you wanted to at least become competent in, if not master, to be good at your craft?
And I was lucky. My parents, I was a pretty reluctant pianist when I was younger. They started me very early, and really, at Windsor, I had the environment. So, there were pianos everywhere and practice rooms everywhere, and we had it scheduled into our day. And that was really where I really took off with my instruments. And I remember going to see, this is a really cheesy story, but I remember going to see Titanic. And I mean, a lot of these kids at the school were like, they had parents who were musicians my parents are music lovers, but they're not professional musicians by any means. And, these kids would be proficient, like grade 8 in 2 instruments at age 11. And I was good, but I was certainly behind. But what I realized when I went to see Titanic is I came back and I sat down on the piano and I played James Horner's theme. I think my parents were like, oh, wow, that's kind of interesting. And even my peers at Windsor, they were really good readers. And of course their ears were brilliant too, but I think that was just something that I sort of discovered. And that's what really ignited the anatomy of music, understanding the anatomy of harmony, knowing how you can make it, how you can inject emotion into things.
So the film score for Titanic, it sounds like, was pretty influential for you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that stylistically it was something I would, of course, with greatest respect to James Horner, he's one of the most wonderful composers we've ever had. And certainly, his scores to Braveheart and Beautiful Mind are some of my real favorites. But I wouldn't necessarily say that the Titanic specifically influenced me, but it sort of was a moment that I realized that it was a way into the anatomy of a good piece of music.
So tell us about the transition from film school at USC into the professional world, where you're actually working on real film projects and are in the industry and are sought after now.
Yeah, it's definitely, I wish I could meet myself from 15 years ago and I'd probably give myself a slap and be like, you realize how lucky you are. I never dreamed I'd get this far. I think that's how we all approach these things. Everybody knows how competitive the business is, and you just take each thing as it comes and try and do your best. You can't determine so many of the opportunities that you just hope that they come, and you put your love into the music and you do your best writing, and then that speaks for you. But at USC, we had a really fantastic seminar with Harry Gregson Williams, who I'd been aware of for a long time because he'd actually taught my sisters music in a children's opera in Holland Park in London, which actually Michael Kamen was also involved in. So I think my first sort of awareness of film composers came from my sisters doing this children's opera.
And then when you were in film school, were the connections sort of fed to you through the alumni of the school, kind of reaching out to upcoming graduates and kind of pulling you into projects as perhaps in a mentor-mentee relationship? Or how did that transition into a professional career from USC to where you're at now?
Yes, there was a lot of contact with alumni and a lot of these sort of seminars. So with Harry, he had us over to his studio, and because I've been aware of him, I was like, and I really loved his Shrek score, and I really loved his scores in general. I was thinking, I've got to nail this. If I can't, there's those moments in your life where it's a self-imposed challenge. Nobody's telling you, if you don't do this, you won't get this. But it's something that's looking you squarely in the eyes, and you're saying, if I can't impress Harry or do something good for Harry, then I clearly, it's a barometer of where you should be pushing yourself and your own expectations for yourself. So needless to say, I stayed up for 3 days on something that I probably now consider quite easy, but I think he gave us a cue from Shrek to redo, and he gave us a couple of cues from a film called 12, which was I think a Joel Schumacher movie. And then he invited me to intern for him. And so I sort of, got to know him, and he was very supportive. He then in fact went back to England, and so I went to work at Remote Control. The other thing I'll add about USC is there was an internship with John Powell that was assigned in the first week. And it was assigned literally the first week of our school. And I remember thinking, oh gosh, I wish I'd had a shot at that. I love when his How to Train Your Dragon score had just come out. I remember thinking, oh man, why did the program director not give us a test or give us a chance to, how did he make this decision? And then I started to hear, of course, poor person in the internships getting no contact with John and is sort of doing something fairly medial. And not that that's not an important aspect of getting into the business. But anyway, come full circle, I eventually, having worked at Remote, got introduced to John. And it's funny how life is. I mean, had I got that internship, I would never have been able to have John look at me as a potential composer. Whereas by the time I'd actually met him, I'd already written additional music on Despicable Me 2, which was a Illumination Entertainment movie, which he'd done, of course, the Lorax. So he, I think it was a sort of rite of passage. So when I met him, he viewed me as somebody who could help him in a musical way, as opposed to somebody who'd cut samples. So
right.
It's funny how life is like that, and it's so much about timing, and then it's so much about when you get the opportunity, just not letting go and making sure you do everything you can to do the job as well as you can.
So timing, luck, obviously luck is a component, I think, for everybody in this industry, but also being able to recognize the opportunity when it's in front of you and knowing how to capitalize on that opportunity.
Yeah, and a lot of tenacity, I think. I mean, being the one who wants to stay there late to find the best way of doing that arrangement, finding the best harmony for this, finding the best counterpoint. I mean, just not letting go until you feel like you don't know how else to do it.
So how did you get involved with Despicable Me 2?
So after interning with Harry, he actually decided to go back to England to do a sabbatical and teach cricket. And he really loved that. And he'd been kind of going full blast in Hollywood for the best part of 20 years. And he was invited to do this. And he said, "I'm so sorry, I was going to have you come on, but I'm winding down my whole operation." And in fact, he let go of the studio he had in Venice Beach. So I thought, oh gosh, I better get another job. And somebody called me to go to remote. And I started doing arrangements and additional music for Heitor Pereira. He's a wonderful guitarist who came up also under Hans and then, subsequently composed his own movies. And so I was a part of that movie. It was really fun. Then, after that, I sort of think I felt that I had more to give as a composer and an arranger in a sort of, different styles. And so when I met John, I certainly didn't hesitate.
Yeah. Well, these are really popular, great films that are iconic and are going to live on for decades.
Right.
And how does it feel to be a part of those projects?
It's wonderful, and it's really wonderful for younger composers that there's a structure that really Hans started. I think traditionally support composers, or what's called additional music composers, were orchestrators, in the old Hollywood model. And with the technology of having to do demos and, have everything mocked up and everything within the computer, that role of orchestrators transitioned into the additional music composers. And, that's something that Hans very much started, and everyone who's worked and come up under him has sort of followed a similar model. And, with deadlines and changing schedules and all these things, it's great to really 70 pieces of music in a film. To have the support of arrangers and other composers is a very necessary thing on these high budget movies. So it's it's wonderful to get that experience. I think I'd really encourage young composers to do that. Of course there's a narrative of, you're getting screwed, or you're not getting full credit and all these things. But honestly, if you compare it to most businesses, whether it's a law firm or a finance firm, every firm has that structure. I think the confusion in Hollywood is that because the credit's music by, the assumption is that that person is doing every single possible task related to delivering the score, which just isn't practical, and also isn't reasonable for people at the top of their game who've been working for 30 years. And so, from a creative point of view, you're getting the chance to work with a film that you'd never be on age 25, on your own. And so when you then get the breaks, your own breaks, you have the confidence to approach them because you've been flying the wall with these huge directors. So, it's been an essential part of my training, and it sort of prepares you for battle for what's to come.
So tell us what a film composer or scorer does for listeners who really don't know the full scope of responsibilities of what you do working on a film like Despicable Me or How to Train Your Dragon or the more recently Promising Young Woman.
Your job as a composer for, I think, 99.9% of films, and I'm only saying that just because there may be an exception, is to create an authority to the film. So you're creating a sound that helps the audience to engage in the film and the tone of the film that they're watching, and helps them believe in it, and helps set up a logic to which that experience is going to unfold in front of them. And of course, within that, there's all sorts of things one does to play with that or mislead the audience, or but essentially you're giving them permission to feel things, which without the score they'd be left feeling a bit dry emotionally.
Yeah. Well, the reason I ask that is that I hear in movies, and I heard this with almost every film that I see, there's a mix of composition, orchestral or piano, sort of the traditional film score sounds, and then actual songs from bands. So how does that work in terms of, do you have like a producer or a director that's telling you, all right, this scene, don't worry about it because it's either going to be silent or we're going to have a song that we get the rights to? Or are you doing a score for the entire thing and then you're letting the director cut out certain sections and insert songs?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think there's no greater authority, and go back to what I was just talking about, this idea of giving the film authority. There's no greater authority than a song, because it's something that, especially if it's a famous song, so it's something that you hear and it floods the film with a mythology, as long as it's well chosen. I mean, obviously, if it's a jarring choice, which also actually can be effective in its own way, if it's a jarring choice against the narrative, then it might countermand that. So a piece of music that you already know has a very different effect dramatically than a score. And obviously a score can be much more versatile. It can be song-ish in style and in intensity. But a score is much more versatile. It can be extremely subtle. Of course, it won't have lyrics, which is obviously useful for dialogue, although of course in songs you can mute the vocals and things like that and do edits. But no, I mean, every project, normally it's been temped with the songs. A great director and editor will design the film in such a way that they've already planned, okay, this is a song moment, and that's going to be really good for the film. It's going to, as I said, the song will have a different feeling than a score piece. And then, you spot the film, and you absolutely, that stuff has been workshopped normally before you're involved through the edit. So yeah, I mean, but that's always something that I think when you come onto the project, you should challenge those things too, to yourself first, right, before like sticking your hand up and saying, oh, I think you should do this. But it's always a work in progress, that balance of how much score do you have? What does it really need to do? And obviously editors are amazing partners in that, especially with, newer directors who are sort of trying to, figure out where they want music and where music's needed.
So it sounds like when you get the film, you're actually seeing a fairly complete film that just does not have, it may have the music, the songs already picked by the director and placed in certain scenes. But your job is to fill in the gaps tonally and to create that permission, as you said, for people to believe and feel certain things that the director really is looking for. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as part of the edit, they'll also temp in existing film music for their own workshopping of the scenes to see how the scenes are responding. So, in most films you'll receive, sometimes you come on with a very rough edit, which I think is great because you can start to chip away. You don't have to score the whole thing at once, but you can start to find what the most important emotional anchors for the score are going to be. And then when you get a fairly locked cut, it will have temp in it, and sometimes the director will be really attached to the temp score, and sometimes they won't. And it's a useful tool for sure. There's a huge debate about temps, whether because they can cause problems, because if a director's, they've really fallen in love with how a scene feels with a certain piece of music, it can be really hard to get them to fall in love again.
Yeah. As you may have noticed, there are great resources and advice mentioned in all our episodes. And for many of them, we actually collect all of these resources for you in one easy place, our newsletter. You can go to dreampathpod.com/newsletter to join. It's not fancy, just an email about each week's episode, featured artists, and resources to help you on your journey. Thanks. And now back to the interview. One observation I made during A Promising Young Woman and during other films that I've seen during the festival as well is that the distinct comedic moments where there's like a scene that is designed to be funny, there's almost no music or score of any kind. Is that your experience? Is that those scenes that are designed to get laughs, that they're kind of clean that way?
Yeah, I think that's a good observation. I mean, that can, yeah, I mean, you know, in classic animation, there's a trick, which is that, you know, music's going, music stops, there's a joke. And that's a very clear way of sort of pulling the needle off the record to make space for that joke. And again, it's clearly articulating it. Whereas I think if you have score ongoing, psychologically, you have something that could be very funny. And then, I mean, of course, there's comedy music too. There's music that can be funny, and there's music that can make things funnier because it's ironic. So something that's supposed to be funny, but it's being played with very dangerous music, like a parody. You know, certainly like Seth Rogen's movies. What was the movie that he made in North Korea?
The Netflix film, right?
Yeah, and you know, huh?
The Interview.
Yeah, The Interview. So it's like so a film like that, you don't want to suddenly go, oh, let's do funny music because it's trying to be funny. You actually counterbalance it by making it really serious and imperial.
Yeah.
You know, for Kim Jong-il's character. So, you know, in Promising Young Woman, yeah, I think you know we stayed away from having too much some of the more sinister horror score because it creates a vapor that the audience are thinking, well, hang on, is this supposed to be really scary or not? So yeah, I mean that's true, and it's amazing how Emerald balances this incredible subject matter with so much humor. Yeah, at some of the darkest moments.
Well, you know, one thing I noticed about Promising Young Woman, I saw it at the premiere, I think, or I saw it at the Ray a couple days ago. I'm not sure if that was the premiere, but
did you see it in the morning?
It was in the morning.
Yeah, the premiere was the night before. It was on Saturday night. Yeah,
I guess I missed the premiere. But I noticed that you talked about the different genres that it crossed over. Mm-hmm. And I was, first, I'm thinking this is a comedy. And then I'm thinking, holy shit, this is a really dark comedy. And then I'm thinking, okay, this is full on someone dealing with PTSD drama.
Right. You know,
and then I'm at a certain point in the film, I'm thinking this is like a thriller.
Right.
Yeah. So what were the challenges? And I'm trying not to give too much away about the film because there's a lot that I think you just need to go in with no expectations on this movie.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. And I think Emerald will very much appreciate that because it's very much an experience. It's a really cool linear experience that like, yeah, you want to see it unfold. You don't want to know what's going to happen.
Right. And especially with someone attached to the film like Carey Mulligan. And she brings with her a lot of gravitas in terms of heavy drama, not a big comedic actor that I've seen in her filmography, but you come with expectations about who is in the film. And then you see, oh, it's Bo Burnham is in there as well. So you think, okay, maybe there's a chance this could be a comedy. And those expectations were just blown out of the water about every 20 minutes in this movie. And it was a pretty wild ride.
I think Emerald was very clever in her casting, in specifically choosing actors that did have those associations. Yeah. So that she was, you know, she's playing with us all, you know, starting with Adam Brody, who's one of the most likable, you know, actors and friendliest characters, you know, as Seth from the OC, in our culture. And that's exactly what she's trying to do, is show you something you're used to seeing and then show you the hidden camera. Mm-hmm. You know, in those early kissing scenes where you're sort of going, okay, well, you can see the perspective of the men that she's with, but you're also seeing the camera from the side and you're seeing what's really going on. And that, you know, with the music is a big part of it too, because Emerald really wanted to play with the audience and, you know, lead them down certain roads. Oh, am I in a horror movie? You know, of course, and then so the very first cue is a full-on horror cue, and then it cracks into It's Raining Men, and I'm giving things away, but not only that, everyone knows about Raining Men. and she has a hot dog, and it's like, well, you see sort of blood,
the blood, yeah,
and it's like, did something happen, and then of course it's so that is very much something that she's playing with us all, pushing us, and in the horror moments, and then equally in the very romantic moments, she's showing us there's this perspective which is how the world's expected to be, where everything's okay.
Right. So how closely are you working with the director when you sit down with I assume you have a digital keyboard of some kind that has the ability to play standard, piano pieces, but also get into, violin and all of the things that keyboards do these days. And correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm stating anything wrong.
No, you're completely right. Yeah.
So you're sitting at a keyboard and you've got the unscored film in front of you, and you're watching it, you're listening to the dialogue. How closely are you working with the director, if at all, for that first draft? Where you're I would guess that there's a stream of consciousness aspect to your approach to that.
I think you definitely need both things. You need that time with the door locked, nobody in there, and that you can try things out, and you can. I think every composer in the world would dread to see that recorded, just because it's that moment of vulnerability where you want to try things out, and you want to see. You want to be able to dare and not feel like somebody's watching you, and therefore have to modify what you're doing to be some kind of finished product.
Yeah.
That said, especially on a film like this with Emerald, she really was incredibly supportive and helpful, coming to the studio and getting into the anatomy of the music and saying, oh, can we just have piano here? And oh, can we, I really want I want a string thriller score. Because there was a whole conversation we had early on about, because of all the pop songs in the score, and because of it has been mentioned, the featuring of Toxic, which I did an arrangement of for near the end of the movie. There was this sort of question of, well, should the score be a sort of version of mangled pop? And I think Emerald felt that she really wanted the score to live in its own headspace and tonally, and to support this sort of old school thriller feel. So it's really a classic thriller with a sort of contemporary twist, I think, overall, the score. And obviously some very romantic moments and some very horrific moments. But no, she really was an integral part of being there and steering me. And, she'd say, oh no, play the thing, get the strings up, play the theme, just play the theme for the strings, on the strings. Yeah, that's great. Let's send that to the producers. And I'm going, oh, hang on a second, Emerald. I've got to make this worthy, so that, as an MP3, and, everyone every intern and their mother has an opinion when these things go out. So there's a difference between the kind of controlled environment of the studio and then actually a track going out to people and not, you not being able to speak for it. But no, she was a huge part of that, which isn't always the case. I mean, obviously on a lot of films, you'll write the score and it's expected that you're translating the emotions, and then actually the technical maneuverings of the music that's your job as the head of the department to determine. But Emerald she's sort of such an all-rounder in life and in her work. Mm-hmm. She's an author, she's an actor, she's just written the book for the Andrew Lloyd Webber's new Cinderella musical. So I think it's impossible for her to not want to get under the hood.
Yeah.
And I really respect that. And it's really fun. I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's her film, and you want her to understand what's going on in the score.
When you were seeing the scenes for the first time, which toward the beginning, there's some, I would call them love scenes, just to make it easy, but it's more complicated than that for sure.
Right.
But the awkwardness and the extreme discomfort that I think the audience feels, or at least I felt, from not really knowing how dark this situation is, not knowing where it's going. How did you deal with that as a film scorer, and how did you approach the music or the film score to those particular scenes?
I think that the very first one of those, we waited as long as we possibly could before the music comes in, because if it were the kind of romantic scene that you were describing, the music probably would come in, or something, or you'd normally have a needle drop song that reassures you that this romance is consensual, and then it would cut to the next scene, or show you a sex scene or something. Whereas in this case, it's all about reveling in that awkwardness. Mm-hmm. And only when things become, only as Cassie as a character actually reveals her hand does the score start to unfold in those scenes.
Yeah, one of the things I think Emerald is great at is making the audience feel like, should I be laughing here? Like, holy shit, I just laughed at that scene. And then you're sort of forensically going back and going, I shouldn't have laughed at that. Because it's just, you don't know, like I said, you just don't know how dark and wrong it is until after you're in it and you're trying to navigate your way through the emotions. And that's what was so profound, I think, about the experience from an audience standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's trying to show us all a mirror of us, of ourselves. I think we've all interacted or known or been the people in that film on some level. And, especially the characters that are sort of the innocent bystanders in big inverted commas.
Right.
And I think that's the message that she really hits home throughout the movie, and especially towards the end. So yeah, I mean, I think it certainly as a male, I felt very uncomfortable the first time I saw the movie. In a fantastic way, because as I said, it's shining this big mirror on everybody and drawing us to question our perspective.
Yeah, absolutely necessary. Culturally necessary to do that. So I see in your filmography that you have some video game work as well.
Yes.
Yeah. How did you get involved in video game scoring, if that's what you call it?
I mean, I think, video game music and television music in general, especially in the last 10 years, has become very close to film scores in terms of the kind of production value and dramatic and emotional qualities that they're trying to achieve through their games and TV shows. And, so developers of those games look for Hollywood composers to come on board. Yeah, I scored Knack 2, which was a PlayStation game. It was really fun adventure game. And, they were looking for more of an animated Pixar score. And because I'd come from a lot of animated movies, they wanted that sort of touch on the score. And that's how I got involved.
And what do you prefer in terms of film versus video games or other types of music performance? Which way are you leaning professionally these days?
Honestly, I'm lucky to be, I count myself really lucky to do this for a living at all. So, I mean, I'm, really interested in both. They both have their perks. I mean, the film obviously has a wonderful structure and narrative and, shape to it that I find really intriguing. Where do you establish a theme? Where do you hit ideas home in the context of a film? Obviously, a video game doesn't have that linear experience. It's much more expansive, which is fun too. You can't quite control how the audience are going to experience the music. And because they're determining it based on their environment a lot of the times. But it's also, I mean, it's really fun. You're often, a big aspect of video game music is that you're trying to provide energy for the game. So there's an opportunity to write modular tracks, which, possibly they rely less on harmonic changes, but more on instrumental and modular groove-based changes. So, on Knack, we did a lot of, African percussion and, interesting elements that you could put the same tonal shape on or not, and it would still work. Obviously modulation and harmony is difficult to mesh. If you suddenly want to put two ideas on top of each other, they won't work well, whereas percussion is much more malleable.
Are you working with a director in a video game context, or what is the name of your boss in a video game?
You can. It really depends on the game. I mean, often there's an audio team, a very strong audio team, who, at PlayStation, they'll be the ones that actually are implementing the music into the game in terms of how they want it to work. So they'll ask you to write a piece a certain way, and they're often music producers essentially. Yeah. Who you work with. So in the case of Knack 2, that was who I worked with predominantly. But then, of course, the director of the game is a director of a video game is a lot more involved in some of the programming and coding aspects often, and in terms of actually how the game is going to work. So the creative music aspects will often be handled by the audio directors. But it depends on the game. It depends on the company.
What are some of the biggest challenges that you face from the standpoint of the business aspects of your job, in terms of getting paid, making sure you're treated fairly, making sure that you are considered for future projects with other studios, getting the appropriate credit? Are there challenges that jump out at you that are just really frustrating and difficult to navigate?
I think everyone in life has their frustrations and, and also their huge moments of like, wow, this is amazing. I can't believe I'm getting to do this. Hopefully, I hope we all feel that, because I think everyone deserves that. Any kind of freelance situation for anybody is complicated because you can't determine schedules. They'll come in and then they'll change, and you have to adapt. Much like any service industry, you have to accommodate your client or not, and that pressure to succeed is hard. It's not for the faint of heart, for sure, and it's something you get better at as you do it more, and it's something as you become more successlower, you do get paid better and you get bigger budgets, and it's easier to deliver at a higher level. It's very hard to deliver at a high level on lower budget productions, because you have to go above and beyond to, really make every dollar go as far as it can. But, equally, not every project needs a symphony orchestra. There's creative ways of breathing life and emotion into things that don't cost a lot of money. And so it's just finding what's that balance of what's going to make the director really happy, and what are they going to love, what's going to make their movie fantastic without costing them $500,000 to produce. I think that can be frustrating when you're trying to achieve something and you're limited in terms of budget. As we're in a time of more and more content, and but probably for slightly lower budgets than has been in the past.
So this, going to the symphony orchestra reference that you made, are those usually reserved for the Pixar Studios pictures where you have the budget to bring in an entire orchestra, and the other projects, maybe the indies, you're kind of doing that yourself with your own instruments? Yeah,
definitely. DreamWorks Animation and Pixar are known for their fantastic scores, and Disney Animation, and those budgets are allocated early on, as they have been for many years. I suppose it really depends what you need. There's lower budget orchestra options, so you can record in Eastern Europe, and there's lots of other ways of doing it. But yes, typically you find yourself very fortunate if you're on a drama and you're given a week with a big orchestra. In terms of budget, that's right. And to be honest, you probably don't need it. So it's just about that. It's that sort of melting pot of, what do you need, and then what's practical? What do you need dramatically and emotionally, and then what's actually practical for the filmmakers?
What future projects are you excited about that we can look forward to seeing or hearing?
I'm really excited about this beautiful Arabian animation that I'm a part of, which is it's essentially a story of friendship between a boy and his dog, except it's set in Arabia, so it's a boy and his camel. It's still in development, but I've been, because animations, you'll often come on pretty early, start developing themes, and they'll start carving out the space that they need for the music. So I started on that this year, and I'm really excited to see that, because that's, going back to our conversation about luck, and composers are sort of judged by their projects, but you can't choose your projects, and you can only you have to write the score that's best for the movie. And to be able to write a score like this, which is a sort of Lawrence of Arabia meets How to Train Your Dragon, is a real blessing. So I'm really excited for that, and hope to really be able to show my best work on that.
Oh, that does sound exciting.
Yeah.
What can you say? What studio that's through, or is it hush hush?
Not at the moment. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And where can people find you and follow you on the internet or social media?
I have Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. I have Facebook composer page, and I'm also on Spotify. I was very lucky to have an album for the How to Train Your Dragon holiday special put out on Spotify, which is
nice.
Yeah, it's got a lot of John's score for all the How to Train Your Dragon movies that I was lucky to be a part of the second two. But they're so incredible that they've generated this huge fan base for the franchise of people who really love that music as much as they love the movies in many ways. And so it was a real privilege to have an album out as well. And so those fans have sort of dived into that as well. And, it's really cool to see a lot of people add that to their How to Train Your Dragon playlists. So, that's being consumed, and that's been a really nice way to get my name out there as well.
Great. Well, I'll put links to all of those sources on the show notes.
Awesome.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Hey, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Dreampath podcast. If so, I have a favor to ask. Can you go to your favorite podcast service and give me a rating and review? Your feedback is what keeps this podcast going. I appreciate your time, and as always, go find your dream path.